The following narrative appeared in Notes and Queries of March 1880. It came from the pen of a young lady. What I am going to relate happened to myself while staying with some North Country cousins last July at their house in Yorkshire. I had spent a few days there in the summer of the previous year, but without then hearing or seeing anything out of the common. On my second visit, arriving early in the afternoon, I went out boating with some of the family, spent a very jolly evening, and finally went to bed, a little tired perhaps with the day's work, but not the least nervous. I slept soundly until between 3 and 4, just when the day was beginning to break. I had been awake for a short time, when suddenly the door of my bedroom opened, and shut again rather quickly. I fancied it might have been one of the servants, and called out, "Come in." After a short time, the door opened again, but no one came in, at least no one I could see. Almost at the same time as the door opened for the second time, I was a little startled by the rustling of some curtains belonging to a hanging wardrobe that stood by the side of the bed. The rustling continued, and I was seized with the most uncomfortable feeling, not exactly of fright, but a strange unearthly sensation that I was not alone. I had had that feeling for some minutes when I saw at the foot of the bed a child, about 7 or 9 years old. The child seemed as if it were on the bed, and came gliding towards me as I lay. It was the figure of a little girl in her nightdress, a little girl with dark hair and a very white face. I tried to speak to her but could not. She came slowly on up to the top of the bed, and then I saw her face clearly. She seemed in great trouble. Her hands were clasped, and her eyes were turned up with a look of entreaty, an almost agonized look. Then, slowly unclasping her hands, she touched me on the shoulder. The hand felt icy cold, and while I strove to speak, she was gone. I felt more frightened after the child was gone than before, and began to be very anxious for the time when the servant would make her appearance. Whether I slept again or not, I hardly know, but by the time the servant did come, I had almost persuaded myself that the whole affair was nothing but a very vivid nightmare. However, when I came down to breakfast, there were many remarks made about my not looking well. It was observed that I was pale. In answer, I told my cousins that I had had a most vivid nightmare, and I remarked if I was a believer in ghosts, I should imagine I had seen one. Nothing more was said at the time upon the subject, except that my host, who was a doctor, observed that I had better not sleep in the room again, at any rate not alone. So the following night, one of my cousins slept in the same room with me. Neither one of us saw or heard anything out of the way during that night or the early morning. That being the case, I persuaded myself that what I had seen had been only imagination, and much against everyone's expressed wish, I insisted the next night on sleeping in the room again, and alone. Accordingly, having retired again to the same room, I was kneeling down at the bedside to say my prayers, when exactly the same dread as before came over me. The curtains of the wardrobe swayed about, and I had the same sensation as previously, that I was not alone. I felt too frightened to stir, when, luckily for me, one of my cousins came in for something which she had left. On looking at me, she exclaimed, "Have you seen anything?" I said no, but told her how I felt, and without much persuasion being necessary, I left the room with her and never returned to it. When my hostess learned what had happened, which she did immediately, she told me I must not sleep in that room again, as the nightmare had made such an impression on me. I should imagine, she said, all sorts of things and make myself quite ill. I went to another room, and during the rest of my visit, a week, I was not troubled by the reappearance of the little girl. On leaving, my cousin, the eldest daughter of the doctor, went on a visit with me to an uncle of mine in the same county. We stayed there for about a fortnight, and during the time the little girl was alluded to only as my nightmare. In this I found afterwards there was a little reticence, for just before leaving my uncle's, my cousin said to me, "I must tell you something I have been longing to tell you ever since I left home. But my father desired me not to tell you, as, not being very strong, you might be too frightened. Your nightmare was not a nightmare at all, but the apparition of a little girl. She then went on to tell me that this little girl had been seen 3 times before by 3 different members of the family, but as this was some 9 or 10 years since, they almost ceased to think anything about it, until I related my experiences on the morning after the first night of my second visit. My cousin further went on to tell me that her younger sister, while in bed, had one morning about daybreak, to her great surprise, seen a little girl with dark hair standing with her back to her, looking out of the window. She took this figure for her little sister and spoke to it. The child not replying, or moving from her position, she called out to it, "It's no use standing like that. I know you. You can't play tricks with me." On looking round, however, she saw that her little sister, the one she thought she was addressing, and who was sleeping with her, had not moved from the bed. Almost at the same time, the child passed from the window into the room of my cousin's sister, and the latter, as she afterwards declared, distinctly saw the figure of a child with dark hair standing by the side of a table in her room. She spoke to it, and it instantly disappeared. The little girl was subsequently seen again, for the last time before I saw it, by my cousin's father. It was in the early daylight of a summer's morning, and he was going upstairs to his room, having just returned from a professional visit. On this occasion he saw the same child, he noticed its dark hair, running up the stairs immediately before him, until it reached his room and entered it. When he got into the room, it was gone. Thus the apparition has been seen 3 times by the family, and once by me. I am the only one, however, that has seen its face. It has also never been seen twice in the same room by anyone else.